Chapter 9. The Work Ethic of a Chief Court Pharmacist and a Reincarnated Pharmacologist. It must have been one of the emperor's attendants who broke the news of Elizabeth's declining health, as a young imperial prince came rushing into the empress's chambers. Bruno stopped the anesthesia for the time being. Since it hadn't fully taken effect yet, it was possible to halt the process. The young prince sobbed and called his mother's name by her bedside. Elizabeth's hand weakly stroked his head. It was no longer the hand of Empress Elizabeth II, who ruled the entire continent, but the hand of a mother caring for her son. What will happen to my son after I'm gone? That thought might have crossed the mother's mind. The sight of the prince clinging to his dying mother tugged at Pharma's heart. With his left eye covered by his hand, Pharma decided on a treatment plan. The first drug discovered for treating tuberculosis was streptomycin in 1943, but Pharma rejected it. It required injection, so he chose an orally administered medicine instead. He would also combine multiple drugs to guard against drug resistance. Isoniazid, pyrazinamide, ethambutol. He had 3 candidate drugs. He wanted to use 4, but matter creation was only possible for compounds he could visualize perfectly with his eyes closed. There were only 3 simple compounds whose structures he could precisely picture. Polymer compounds were more difficult to recall. He knew their structures and could write their formulas, but he couldn't visualize many of them. When he named the 3 drugs, the light above him faded, but didn't completely vanish, leaving a faint glow. Sensing a problem, Pharma thought, I guess I should add one more drug, just in case. He decided to add a 4th drug as a final push. I'll force the visualization. I'll burn the afterimage into my brain. He stared intently at the structural formula he'd written on a piece of paper. When he closed his eyes, the image was projected directly onto his mind. He was quick on his feet. Rifampicin. The most complex drug, and the key to the treatment, was indeed necessary. The white light finally disappeared. Your Majesty. Pharma folded a large handkerchief, held it over his mouth, and tied it behind his head to create a makeshift mask. He steeled himself, walked up to the Empress, bowed respectfully, and introduced himself. Then he got straight to the point. May I have your permission to treat you? Empress Elizabeth II's eyes were vacant as she gazed at Pharma from her sickbed. What are you talking about? There was no such thing as a guaranteed cure. The Empress's condition could worsen, and she could die before the drugs took effect. Even with those risks in mind, Pharma spoke with a conviction that came from his very being, enunciating every word. I have a miracle cure. Objectively, Pharma de Medicis was a 10-year-old apprentice pharmacist. His skills and knowledge were far inferior to those of his father and the other renowned pharmacists who served at court. What is this presumptuous apprentice saying? The court physicians grumbled, openly annoyed. To them, he was just a snot-nosed kid spouting nonsense. Pharma, get back! Bruno yelled at him in a furious rage. Bruno's face was pale as he leaped at Pharma, grabbing him in a headlock and trying to drag him out of the room. Please don't say anything stupid, his face seemed to plead. While dragging Pharma away, Bruno tried to make amends. My sincerest apologies, Your Majesty. My foolish son has been disrespectful. I'll remove him immediately. Wait a moment. The Empress silenced Bruno. She then looked around at the assembled courtiers and physicians. Is this true? The entire assembly of court physicians and pharmacists fell silent, looking embarrassed. There was no answer. Feeling abandoned, the Empress looked straight at Pharma. You know, don't you? Yes, I do, Pharma said, bowing. As a divine art user, she knew better than anyone that her life was hanging by a thread and that death was imminent. And she also knew that her most trusted court pharmacists and physicians would likely be the ones to kill her. It felt like gambling everything on the wild ramblings of a boy who had appeared out of nowhere, a bet you could only make once. But despite everything, she read the firm conviction in the boy's eyes. His eyes were clear and unwavering, as if he knew the truth. I wish to entrust my fate to your hands. Pharma and the Empress's gazes met. Please, the Empress said, bowing her head as if to muster her last ounce of strength. Her shoulders looked so frail. Understood, Pharma said, facing her as a patient and taking on the responsibility for her life. There was no turning back. The court physicians and his father, Bruno, who were in the Empress's bedchamber, froze. No one dared to get in Pharma's way. Calmly, Pharma took a saliva sample from the Empress. "I'll be borrowing the compounding room," he said, before leaving and locking the door from the inside. "Wait, Pharma!" His father followed him out of the Empress's presence and rushed to the compounding room, but the door wouldn't budge. "Open up!" As his father pounded on the door, Pharma expertly spread the Empress's saliva sample onto a glass slide. He arranged small vials of chemicals on the table, took some with a glass rod, and spread them over the sample. He heated the slide over a lamp flame, then arranged several more vials and passed the sample through the chemicals in order. He rubbed a metal toy-like tool over the glass and then held it up to the light of the lamp, peering through it. "Just as I thought." Just as Pharma reached a conclusion, his father destroyed the door with a divine art and burst into the room. The broken lock. In the dimly lit compounding room, illuminated by a candlestick, it was just the two of them. A tense atmosphere weighed heavily on the air. "Tell me, what were you doing?" To Bruno, it must have looked like Pharma was performing some shady sorcery. "What do you think you're doing, acting so presumptuously? Stop what you're doing, right now." Bruno was furious, his voice trembling as he demanded answers from Pharma. "I was preparing a treatment for your majesty." "You fool!" Bruno's roar cut off Pharma's explanation. "You can search for the greatest physician in the world, but no one can cure White Death, and you dare to talk about a new drug?" Wait, did he just say White Death? Pharma stopped what he was doing. "I'm surprised, Father. So you had diagnosed her with White Death, tuberculosis. How did you know?" Among all the physicians, only his father had figured out that the Empress had tuberculosis. The other physicians were lost, muttering about bodily fluids and constellations. Pharma had thought of his father as an occult pharmacist, but he had underestimated him. "When I reacted my potion with the sample, it showed signs of White Death. On what basis are you speaking?" A moment ago, his father had mixed a homemade potion with the Empress's saliva. Now that I think about it, Pharma was surprised to realize the process was similar to a diagnostic test for tuberculosis. Was it a coincidence? No book at Pharma's home contained such a testing method. Moreover, the potion was made from herbs that his father had crushed and compounded after pouring his divine power into them while dancing wildly in the herb garden the night before. It had that effect. Pharma was speechless. "Is that written in a book somewhere?" "It's a new divine art I developed. It's not in any book. Who do you think I am?" Bruno de Medicis was one of only 3 chief court pharmacists on the continent. He held a peerage and was the chancellor of the Imperial School of Pharmacy, a leading expert. If Pharma had been a renowned pharmacologist on Earth, Bruno was a leading scholar of pharmacology in this world. Bruno and Ellen had said that when divine power was poured into herbs, they gained special effects. Bruno was the first in the world to systematically research the combination of divine powers and herbs to create new remedies. He had developed numerous original treatments. Right, this is another world, isn't it? Pharma felt sorry for having viewed his prescriptions with a cynical eye, dismissing them as occult. Maybe the potions his father had instructed Ellen to give him, and the first potion he'd been forced to drink after being struck by lightning, had been effective all along. After all, they were all made with water created with divine arts. This was what Pharma had overlooked. In this other world, divine arts existed. It was not the right attitude for a pharmacologist to dismiss them as occult without scientifically verifying the water and other things created with divine arts. Another world had its own rules. While impressed, Pharma was still puzzled by his father's actions. "Why did you pretend you didn't know the illness earlier, Father? When did you make the diagnosis?" The diagnosis had been made 10 days ago. His father lamented that the reaction for White Death was over 30 times stronger now. "Why didn't I tell them? Because White Death, tuberculosis, is incurable. What good does it do for a pharmacist, who should be a constant source of support for the patient, to gleefully plunge the Empress into despair? You don't understand these things because you're still a novice." That was why he had agreed with the other physicians, despite having made his own diagnosis. Treating White Death is meaningless for Her Majesty. Do not bring shame upon her deathbed. And I've never seen a disease cured by the laying on of hands in the past. In this world, there was a legend that tuberculosis could be cured by a king laying on their hands upon the patient. That was why they couldn't tell anyone that the empress had tuberculosis, and why there was no cure. The only one with greater power than the emperor is God, so her illness was seen as an act of divine punishment. It was a matter of imperial honor. Don't lie about a new drug. There is no new drug for White Death. That's the conclusion from the report we just received from Novolute. A new drug is nothing but your pathetic and uneducated fantasy. It seemed Bruno was constantly seeking new information from the Novolute Medical University, the world's most advanced institution, and was always up to date on the latest knowledge in this world. Bruno sternly lectured Pharma that it was dishonest to lie to a patient. Prescribing a placebo was a serious sin. It was better to confess that there was no cure. Bruno had gone to great lengths, all for the Empress's sake. Mr. Bruno, he really was a great pharmacist. Pharma genuinely reconsidered his father and felt a sense of respect. The recent dry coughs his father had been having were a result of contracting tuberculosis. It was clear even without his divine eye. His father had known the Empress had tuberculosis, yet he stayed by her side, becoming infected himself, all while searching for a treatment not for himself, but for her. He was risking his own life. Pharma asked his father again, "I understand, but you still believe that euthanasia is the best option for your Majesty?" "That is the best method." Pharma nodded. He agreed that it was the best option with the cards his father was holding. A miracle cure does exist. Don't lie. I'm not, and it's something you should be taking too. Bruno was speechless. His son had seen his tuberculosis infection. It seemed to be something he had kept hidden. Pharma generated water and carefully washed his hands. After drying them with a sterilized cloth, he reached into his bag on the table and, with his back to his father, took out a flask and a vial. He held his left hand over the vial, both of which had been pre-sterilized. "I'll make it a sweet syrup so she can drink it." Potions were commonly used and familiar in this world. A syrup would be easy to drink, with little resistance to the texture. The patient was in a state where severe coughing made it difficult to take medicine, so he needed to be creative. "Turn around, Pharma. What?" Bruno saw a flash of pale blue light. It was the light of matter creation, but it resembled the sign of a water divine art being activated. "Wait!" Pharma didn't listen. He imagined the structural formulas of the 3 drugs and created the specified amount of each treatment drug, dropping them into the vial. Finally, he wrote down the structural formula for the most complex drug, rifampicin, on a piece of paper and used the afterimage to burn it into his brain. He was now able to create the medicine. He filled another vial with syrup. He then brought the finished treatment drug out and showed it to his father. "Did you just use a divine art? Why are you hiding this from me? What are you trying to compound?" He shook the medicine he had transferred to the flask to mix it well. A transparent, viscous syrup was created. "If you can't explain your compounding process, then it's poison. Explain yourself." His father must have reached his breaking point. He raised his golden staff and pointed it directly at Pharma. For a noble, a staff is a sword. He recalled Ellen's words. Bruno was essentially pointing a blade at his own son. "Put down your staff, father. Are you trying to flood the compounding room?" But his father didn't listen. Pharma placed the flask on the table. "Dance d'épée de la glace, sword dance of ice." Bruno cast the incantation, launching an attack at the flask on the table. The trajectory of the attack was aimed to avoid harming Pharma himself. He's attacking. Ice knives were fired at close range. But any divine art cast by his father, a water divine art user, was, in any state, water. Knowing this, Pharma had no hesitation. He swung his right hand to protect the medicine. "Disappear." He accurately visualized the molecular structure of ice and conveyed it to his right hand, sweeping it through the air. The ice knives vanished without a trace the moment that touched his hand. He then held up his left hand and instantly created a thick ice barrier between himself and his father. He did it without an incantation or a staff, just with his bare hands. It was a perfect defensive wall. Bruno, a positive water attribute user, could no longer attack Pharma. "What? What did you just do?" Bruno's eyes widened with fear at his son's unexpected resistance. Separated by the ice wall, Pharma declared to his father, "I will explain the miracle cure in front of your majesty." Ugh, this is it. Everything is ruined. That must have been what he was thinking, as Bruno's eyes filled with despair. He then asked Pharma, "Who are you?"